How singing transforms suffering is the topic that I'd like to speak about. Sadly, part of the human condition is suffering. There are even entire philosophies and theologies and schools of thought that are built around just that idea, how to relieve suffering. In marketing terms, they say there's two main pressure points: pleasure and pain. So all advertising is either giving you something to press your pleasure button or something to avoid or kill pain. And those are the two most primal emotions of the human being: to gain pleasure and to avoid pain. I don't think it's much of an argument. It's probably more time we spend avoiding pain than gaining pleasure. As a matter of fact, you can even argue that many of us use pleasure in order to numb the pain. But regardless, these are two key, as I said, primal forces. And one way or another, we all go through life, we're going to have some form of, we'll call it negative experiences. You may call it pain, you can call it suffering, you can call it anxiety, you can call it despondency. I mean, the names go on and on and on. And I mean, often you hear, of course, that there's the concept of healing from our pain, healing from our suffering, which is essentially what we call today therapy or other interventions, whether they're physical or psychic, as in psychological, or medical, as in medication, that address the pain that we suffer, the pain that we deal with. Obviously, I'm here to speak not about physical pain and stress, but rather more on the psychological, spiritual, emotional level. Because at the end of the day, only live human beings can suffer. The dead don't suffer. The dead don't feel. There's no sensations. So if there's any redeeming factor to the feeling of some sadness, is that you're feeling it at least. There's some people who are so numb and have become so lethargic they don't even feel it. So as we know, knowing the problem is half the cure. So speaking about it is definitely toward the healing process, rather than concealing or covering it up, which only festers and the infection only grows. But I think that when you look around, history is witness to the thousands, if not tens of thousands, of remedies, attempted remedies, concoctions, potions, again, physical or psychic, that shamans to healers, psychologists, religious leaders, whether it's opiates or faith, many different attempts have been made to try to deal with the pain and the suffering that we deal with. And the question whether they work or not, I'll let everybody decide on their own. The fact is, I don't think anybody's come up with a solution that relieves human suffering. That's why it continues to be such a demand. People continue to search and seek. So when you see best-selling books that talk about it, that alone tells you that no book has solved it, because they wouldn't still be selling if the problem was solved. So I would like to submit, based of course on Torah and Jewish thought, a completely counterintuitive, even radically different approach, which we may have discussed here, you may have heard in different places, but I think taken it to the fullest extreme in an interesting way, that actually the greatest healing for suffering is joy. And that's why then transforming suffering through how singing can transform our suffering, which of course goes against the grain of our reaction, of our knee-jerk reaction. When you're in pain, you don't want to sing. It's the last thing you want to do. When you're in pain or you're suffering, you want to be alone. You want to isolate yourself. You want to bury yourself, somewhere. It goes hand in hand. Why that is, that can be analyzed either as because we feel so disgusted with ourselves, we just don't want to be around people. We don't want anyone to see us in that condition. Or we feel that nobody really can relate to us in that way, and nobody wants to have a person who's a suffering soul around them. feel misunderstood, confused, and we don't want to be around people because nobody can really get and understand our suffering and pain. Or it's simply maybe a byproduct of suffering itself, which is suffering is a very lonely place, a very isolating place. So the last thing you want to do is celebrate. The last thing you want to do is dance, get up and dance and sing and so on. However, without minimizing and taking away, see. Sorry about that. And taking away from the sadness and the pain, because we're not trying to be insensitive to it, without taking away from it, there's still an approach that where singing can help us not just relieve and numb the pain, but actually transform it. Now there's a famous verse that you must have heard. It's from the book of Psalms. Hazerim bedima, those that sow with tears, will reap in joy. Now that concept, that's pretty popular, or you can say well known, that tears can be seen, tears as a sad thing, but tears are also, they are life producing. They are liquid, they're water. And we know water makes things grow. So though they originate as tears of sadness, they end up being seeds, that they end up being water that waters the seeds and allows us to harvest in joy. Which would mean that suffering can lead us to greater places of joy due to the either experience that we learn, we go through the fire, or we get seasoned, or we get more sensitive, and that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But that's a far leap from saying that singing can actually transform joy. Singing can actually transform suffering. Now, I should say the reason I decided to speak about it this week is for a few reasons. First of all, we're now in the period in the calendar year. As I mentioned, the Jewish calendar is very reflective, like a mirror image of life cycles. So just like there's the ups and there are the downs, so we call this period in time after Tisha B'Av, after the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, which reflects destruction both on a collective and personal sense. We've followed the 3 weeks of affliction called Tlosip the Paranusa. We come to the Shiva de Nechemta, which means in Aramaic the 7 weeks of comfort. So in a way we're now in the stage of comfort following pain. And this 7 weeks continue progressively all the way till the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. Because as I said, Jewish thought and Jewish calendar is very much reflective of life, which in addition to many lessons, simply the idea that time flows, and so do our lives, also teaches us about fluidity. Because one of the things about pain and suffering, it almost freezes you and paralyzes you in that moment. If you're able to see that this is just a stage that you're going through and that can lead you to a greater place, that alone is already somewhat comforting. So we're in these 7 weeks of comfort, which will lead into then the high holidays, which will be called 2 weeks of tshuva, actually. So it's Tlos de Paranisa, Shiva de Nechemta, and Tarta de Tiyufta, which means 3 weeks of affliction, 7 of comfort, and then 2 by return, or tshuva, which is return. I discuss in the book 60 Days in the journey that begins next week with the beginning of Elul. So the 60 days, and throughout those 60 days, I discussed the cycle of this 7. So that's a general reason why I'm discussing this topic. But there's an even more specific reason. Today was the 72nd yahrzeit, anniversary of the passing of the father of my great mentor, our great mentor, the Rebbe. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, his father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, passed away on the 20th of Av in the year 1944, Tavshin Dalet, the Hebrew year 5704. So exactly 72 years ago. And passed away. The Rebbe would very often lament the fact that he did not see his father for many years, because once he left Russia in 1929, 28, and probably didn't see his father a number of years before that. He ended up coming to ultimately want to go through Europe, and ultimately coming to New York in 1941. His father passed away 44, so at least 1928 to 1944. You do the math, it's 10, 16 years. You could say probably 20 years that he hadn't seen his father. Close to that amount of time. It's almost the same amount of time that Joseph didn't see his father. And his father, the Rebbe's father, passed away in Almaty in a distant exiled land in Russia because, of course, he was arrested, as were many of his colleagues, for counter-revolutionary activity. Now, what was counter-revolutionary activity? Teaching people to be more refined. Teaching people to be more godly, to be more divine. But that was a threat to the Soviet Union. So others were killed, he was sent to exile. And he suffered there greatly. And he passed away there on this day, 72 years ago. But among the many things that stand out, one thing that really strikes me all the time is something actually that, you marvel. You marvel at the capacity, the composure, the presence of people who suffer like that. Because in his exile, as we know today, he was a scholar. He was known as a Kabbalist. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages of commentary in this exile. Now you may wonder, how did he write? Well, his wife found herbs, found different plants growing at the edges of the reeds and other plants that grow at the edge of the river, and she made from their marrow ink. So we actually see his commentary on the gloss of the Zohar and other books, Tanya and so on, in different colors: blue, orange, red, purple. These were all ink made from the reeds and other plants that you can make ink on. And so a lot of what he wrote was from memory, because he didn't have books with him. He had some with him. But one of the most fascinating things that I find, besides the fact that he was able to write, and does not write about how pained he is. Today they have a thing called literature, decomposing literature. Like you decompose a novel or a book, and you could somewhat extrapolate what the author is like by seeing nuances and references to things that happened during that author's life. And here you don't see this. You just see a momentous amount of writing. But there is one rishima, one manuscript where he writes about his own personal life. And not lamenting and not crying out and not saying how bad it is and how difficult, but he actually explains in detailed Kabbalistic terms how his life has been one of severity. In the Kabbalistic term, Gevura. As his name indicates, both Levi and Yitzchak, Levi was the third tribe, Yitzchak was the son of Abraham, both are related to Gevura. Gevura in Hebrew can mean severity, can mean law, judgment, harsh decrees, discipline. But he goes further, and not only that, he takes his imprisonment, the prisons where he was, the cities where he sat in prison, the time that he sat in prison, and every detail of his suffering, he turns into another piece of the puzzle of his gvuradika, his harsh life. Obviously, at the end, he writes about God should bless that he should be able to be redeemed and freed and live a peaceful life. But what's fascinating about it is, where most people, when they're living in some form of oppression, in prison, torture, or other things, so besides the fact that they lament and they cry out about how terrible it is, they don't really start connecting it to some type of divine choreography. And here you see a man who, in the worst of times, literally in his own personal Holocaust, connects everything, even his prison itself, to some type of divine emanation called Gevura. It's severe divine revelation, but nevertheless, it's some form of revelation in his mind. And if you think about it, it really indicates, it's indicative of many authors. When you read the commentaries like Rashi, or the Ramban, Nachmanides, or Maimonides, or others, who lived in very harsh times. There were pogroms going on in the Middle Ages then, and yet they had the presence of mind to sit and compose works. They composed works that are masterpieces. And you can't see anywhere, not one drop of anguish, not one element of resentment of all the negative energy that so many people develop. Just to give a comparison, you hear about the Muslims in defense of the fact is they were humiliated. They have grievances. That's why we can understand why they're so aggressive. Really. The Jews had many more grievances. We suffer greatly. The Holocaust is just a recent example of it. And yet you don't find that type of angry energy and bitterness. The greats, what they did is they channeled their energy in writing tremendously powerful and acts and humanitarian works that talk about the highest levels of divine growth, spiritual aspirations, commentaries that go into the complexities of the analysis of Talmud or Bible or Torah or Zohar and so on. And you wonder, if you read these books, you would never believe that they were living literally in the eye of the tornado, with storms around them, with their children and their families at risk. So even Rashi himself, the story goes that his mother protected him when the Crusades were beginning to attack and there was a pogrom. So she was walking on a street, she was pregnant. And because she was pregnant, the street was so narrow and the wagon came driving by, she turned and with her stomach to the wall so the baby shouldn't be hurt, she should be hurt instead. And the miracle goes that there was an indentation in the wall, which people still point out to years later, that protected her child. So you could see what kind of circumstances were going on then. And yet this type of inner peace, the ability to see and transcend and recognize there's a bigger picture. And this indeed is a lesson to us about our own challenges, no matter what they may be. And I'm not minimizing. Today, though we don't have the enemy quite as it was then, we don't have people coming to kill us. We don't have people coming to arrest us, put us in concentration camps, gas us, cremate us, etc. But we have our own inner demons, the psychological demons of a comfortable, prosperous world. So there are tremendous lessons to be learned from this Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and of course his own predecessors and others who had the same type of strength. But since today is yahrzeit, I thought this would be appropriate to speak about. So in essence, what he really did was demonstrated that every detail of a person's life is part of a larger choreography. And in some way, as odd as it may initially sound, that helped redeem even suffering, because he saw the suffering as part of his destiny. Now, when you play a symphony, a song, you know that a song, any good song, has many nuances to it, many sections to it, many parts to it. There are parts that are sad, there are parts that are very joyous. There are parts that are ecstatic, and there are parts that are melancholic. But they're all part of one composition, one symphony. And some of the greatest symphonies ever written have that dimension. They have that tension and the drama that it leads to a type of almost a outburst of excitement and resolution. That's really good music, works that way. You see the strains of the strings of a violin or other very fine musical notes where they express some of the more subtle and sad inner chords of human spirit and human life, including suffering. And then they break out in a type of joyous outburst. That's what a good song is about, a good symphony. I mean, today we have the fast food version of a song where, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. When the Beatles released Hey Jude, was a 7-minute song, I think, it was considered like, sacrilegious. No one, 7 minutes. Or when who's it? Steve McLean sang Miss American Pie. It was also, I think, an 8-minute song. Right? So these songs, they broke the limit, the attention span barrier. So songs are usually 2, 3, 4 minutes maximum. 3 minutes is probably, I think, the length of a regular rock song. Okay, but you have symphonies that can go for hours. And when you talk about life, of course, goes more than hours. It goes for years. So when Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was writing this, I'm just it's hard to put ourselves in his shoes, because we're living, as I said, relatively comfortably. But sitting and writing with this ink that his wife made from the reeds, and that type of environment where surely did not have much kosher food, and probably life was extremely, extremely difficult. They say Shabbos, they didn't always have what to eat. And yet was able to sit and write about his challenges and put it into the context of his so-called Gevurah destiny. You have to believe, I like to believe, that this was his way of singing the song. But his song was a sad song. But it was yet a song. He did not allow himself to become a victim of circumstances. We're just saying, oh, why is this happening to me? Why me? Why not someone else? And be angry about it. By turning it into a Kabbalistic type of almost choreography, he actually was finding a way to sing his melody and song. And it's interesting, his son would become the Rebbe, who touched so many people in a positive way, but one that grew out of that type of upbringing, of someone that knew how to write a song even when it was a sad song. So in a sense, someone that really has that soulfulness is always composing music. Sometimes it's sad music. As a matter of fact, we know that some of the best compositions in history were written after tragedies. The depth of some of the greatest masterful art, music, and even art and other forms of artistic expression came from deep pain. Because pain evokes and elicits a dimension of ourselves that is definitely not mediocre and definitely not the regular. So yes, it can overcome us and turn us into zombies, or turn us and overwhelm and paralyze us, or it can be a catalyst to expressing and singing very profound songs. And in a way, it's a way of looking at our lives. I mean, today you can't even compare, as I said, to those days, to those events. But we have an interesting way of looking at our own lives today, which is to realize that in our lives there are stages, like frames in a film. And we should never think our lives as being one frame or 2 frames or 5 frames. So even when there's an uncomfortable piece, you can just say, okay, I'll ride it through. Or you can do what Rabbi Jacobson did. Write a song. Maybe look at that experience and see, how is that part of my larger story? What does it teach me? It also allows you not to be, most important, to be self-consumed. Because I think that lies at the heart of the problem. We're self-consumed. Before our pain and during our pain and afterwards. What does self-consume mean? Everything is about me, and my comforts. So when something's not working, I've got a problem. I'm not happy. Why? This. The ability to do what Rabbi Jacobson did was because he did not focus on the I. If he focused on the I, he would be completely overwhelmed by his experiences. He focused on God. He focused on the higher, bigger picture. And he's one component in that bigger picture, and this is what he's experiencing now. So in the odd way, the more we focus on our own disappointment and how unfair we think it may be, the more the letter I, the word I, is in the sentences, the more one suffers, and the more one cannot get out of the trap, because we become consumed with this negative energy. So you can't even, light doesn't even enter to dispel darkness, because you are feeding the darkness with your own thoughts. Think about how many grievances, even if they're justified, do we carry within the valuable real estate between our ears and the valuable real estate between our arms, the heart. How much energy, how much time, how much energy, how much is going into our anger, our resentment, our wanting to get vengeance, envy, all the vices, eating us up, and above all, not allowing anything positive to enter. When you take experiences in your life that are negative experiences, and you, in turn, instead of focusing on yourself and how you're suffering, saying, okay, it's part of the choreography, it's part of the bigger picture, which is a mystery to me. And how do I see it as such? As soon as you take the focus off yourself, automatically the experience is more tolerable. It doesn't mean it's not painful. We all love to have only joyous experiences. But it turns it into something bigger. Whereas when it's all about me, both joy and suffering all become a very selfish, narrow, myopic experience. So when we day like this, when we talk about a man of this stature, and we look at lessons to be learned, this one is a tremendous lesson. The day 20th of the 20th is actually 40 days right before Rosh Hashanah. Now we know there's an expression, the Talmud says, that 40 days before a child is born, they announce who that child will marry. Interesting. So before 40 days before Rosh Hashanah, which is the birth of the universe, the birth of the human race, is Chafaf. Now, we know that in pregnancy and in birth pains, we don't see yet the child, we only feel the pain. But the pain will bring a new birthing. It's also the month of Av, as I mentioned, it's a sad month. It's true, it's the second half of the month, after the full moon, after the 15th of Av, leading us into the month of El, the month of compassion. But like every birthing, a birthing always precedes some form of pain or some vacuum. So the 20th of Av is that type of a vacuum because it represents a person who lived in a difficult life, but knowing full well that this was only a stage, a frame, leading to a far greater reality. So if you think about it, it means that next time you feel sad, maybe you should start singing. See what happens. I know it sounds odd. It sounds weird even. Start singing. No one has to listen. Start singing a song that reflects your sadness. Compose your own tune. Sing a tune that comes to you. You'll be surprised what will happen. What will happen is that the song will take over. It'll take over because it is an expression. And in a strange way, the grief or the sadness and the negative energy will be feeding this song. I think it was Kierkegaard that writes about the poet or about the artist standing on stage performing for others. And every time he says something and every time he performs, it's like another knife that is cutting into his innards. And that knife, that pain is what's causing him to perform. Like we talk about the clown. The clown laughs, but the sadness of the clown is one of the most saddest things. The clowns that are laughing clowns that make others laugh, they could be very sad. And Kierkegaard concludes, and the crowd keeps yelling more and more. So with every knife that cuts into his flesh, the crowd keeps asking for more because it's entertaining for them, while that person is suffering. So suffering can lead to a song as deep as the pain is, that's how deep the song is. Now, I'm not suggesting allowing others to laugh or to be entertained by our sadness, but I'm suggesting that it's a form of expression, that when you really use it, it can be an extremely powerful tool. What's there to lose? Try it. As I said before, we have all kinds of remedies and concoctions and potions offered to us by the healers of the world dealing with suffering. Let's try a new approach. Let's try Rabbi Yitzchak's approach, which is to sing a song. It could be a sad song, but it's a song nevertheless. And when you think of it that way, your life becomes a series of different melodies or different sections of a larger symphony. Some of them, as I said, are sadder than others. But sadness then leads to resolution where you can come from a sad state to a happier state. So singing is a tool that we underutilize, we don't utilize enough, because it actually can be a tremendous tool to experience transcendence in all circumstances. And the fact of the matter is, we know songs can transport us to another time and place, because they have that type of power. They speak a language that's deeper than the language of regular conventional communication. They speak a language that we all can relate to. Song is the only thing that you don't need to translate song. Everybody can hum the same melody, no matter what country, no matter what creed, culture, language they speak, or no language at all. Song also, when one person sings and another person joins in, is called harmony. When one person speaks and another person joins in, it's called rudeness. Because song is a harmonious voice that we can sing together and we join as one, and the song becomes a sum of the parts, a synergy. Try doing that with speaking. It doesn't work. Speaking, if I speak and you speak, we won't hear each other. So it's interesting, the language of speech and the language of song, how different they are. Now the reason song has that element, because song is connected to water. You find the Shir Sayam, the song over the water, because water is a type of submerging experience where when we're submerged in water, we all get encompassed by it. In regular language, the ego is what dominates. It's like a land mammal. The land mammal dominates. In the ocean, in the sea, what dominates is the water. Not the creature in the water, but the creature is submerged in something greater than itself. When we sing a song, we are being submerged. We submerge ourselves in something greater than ourselves. When we speak, we're speaking what I have to say, my opinion, my thought, my demand, my command, my expectations. Now, maybe if we spoke properly, and every time someone spoke it sounded like a song, obviously then it wouldn't be words, it would be a song. Imagine every conversation we had was a song, was not just words. So song is really a deeper language that connects us and unites us, and above all, takes the experience to another dimension. And it does come down to somewhat of an ego thing. The ego, when it experiences pain or suffering, begins to complain, begins to feel uncomfortable. The song that is sung as a result deflects the issue from you and turns it into a melody. King David wrote an entire book called the Book of Psalms. It has 150 psalms. And when you read it, most of it is actually quite sad, or a large part of it. He laments his difficult life, his having to run for his life, having to run from his enemies, and obviously praises God for protection, but he talks a lot about pain. How his soul thirsts, how he wants to experience the divine revelation and is unable to do so. And it became an entire book, which actually King David made a request of God. Yiyu l'rotzen imrefi, may it be your will, may it be your will, imrefi, that the words that I spoke through my lifetime, the words of praise and the words of from pain, and my cry from my soul, min ametza karasika, from my depths, from my dire straits, I called out to you. May these words become the words that Jews will always use in their prayers. It was a request he made, because at the end of the day, the book of Psalms is King David's experiences, no one else's. And yet he made that request, and God granted him the request, therefore infusing the words of Psalms as becoming the language that all of us can use when we're in need. That's why Jewish tradition, what do you do when someone is, God forbid, not well, or you need a special intervention, or there's a decree? We say Psalms. The way we say Tehillim. Sometimes Tehillim corresponding to the age of the person. That, or like if someone's 20 years old, we'll say the chapter 21. There's the custom that at every birthday, as we get older, we say the chapter of Psalms that corresponds to our age. Psalms is very much part of the prayer service, and especially on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Psalms are said many, many times, both in the prayers, before the prayers, after the prayers. There are people who've said Psalms, I know my grandmother, other grandmothers, thousands and thousands of times in their lives, the entire book of Psalms. Some say it every day, the entire book. Something about this book. Now, the book is not, when you read it, it's not easy reading. It's not so much the logic. When you read it, it's not like Tehillim is an easy book to read. The Hebrew is very cryptic. It's very difficult Hebrew, very poetic. Even if you get the words, the structure of the sentences are not easy to read. But it's not about understanding, because a song, you don't need to understand a song. You know, I mean, there are those that analyze songs, fine. But a song touches you, not whether you understand it or not. As a matter of fact, understanding a song will probably somewhat dampen its effect on you, because then you're analyzing it and you become detached. Being in a song is, like I said, submerged in the waters of something, where something greater is taking over your life. What better way to battle the ego? I talked about pleasure and pain. At the end of the day, it's not the events in our lives that define how happy or sad you're going to be. Because you see people who have very sad experiences in their lives, and yet they're happy people. You have people who have very happy experiences, and yet they're very sad. So what distinguishes between one and the other? You know what distinguishes? One is consumed with themselves. So every time they feel pleasure, I feel good about me. Pain, I feel bad. And the other is not consumed with themselves. So whatever happens to them, whether it's joy or sad or suffering, there's a certain humility. There's a certain lack of less self. Remember, just to use martial arts as an example. If God, like in the Western world, we have boxing, where boxing is about sheer brute power. So power versus power. You punch someone. Now when you punch someone, it could hurt, and the person punches back, and so on. In martial arts, you try to use the other person's energy against themselves. In other words, instead of trying to fight with them, you yield. And that yielding gives you a very big edge. So the more ego there is, the more every sensation becomes amplified. There's a story they say that Tzemach Tzedek, someone once came to the Tzemach Tzedek, who's actually the great-grandfather of the yahrzeit of today, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the third Chabad Rebbe, whose son Baruch Shalom, and ultimately great-grandson is the Levi Yitzchak. So someone came and complained. He says that I go to synagogue, and everybody's picking on me. Everybody's stepping all over me. People are, hurt. They are insulting me, so to speak. So Tzemach Tzedek said to him, if you didn't spread yourself out over the entire shul, people wouldn't step on you. In other words, since you spread yourself out, you're all over the place. Wherever you go, anyone steps, they step on you. Think about what he's saying here. Obviously, it doesn't mean physically spread out. It means, why are you everywhere? The more the ego is involved in an experience, the more profoundly you feel something, and also you feel also the negative. Someone who's not consumed with themselves, the sensations and feelings they have are not going to be as amplified, as acute, because there's no sense self that is so loud. When you self is somewhat toned down, humbled, modest, what's the word I want to use? Recessed instead of pronounced. So then something comes your way, a punch comes your way, you're able to somewhat deflect it. But if you're very strong and rigid, what's going to happen? Every punch is going to be very painful because you're strong, standing strong. The more proud you are, the more arrogant, the louder you are, so to speak, the more the sensations, including suffering, affect us. That's why the Chazal, the scholars, say the following statement: La'olam yehei adam rach kakana, va'al yehei kosher ka'aras. In Hebrew, that means a person should always be la'olam, forever. They should always be flexible and pliable like a reed, and not hard like a cedar tree. Cedar trees are very rigid and very hard. A reed in the wind blows in the wind. It doesn't have that type of resistance. Now you'd think it's the other way around. What we want in life is to be tough, strong, rigid, firm, stand strong. But you know something? What happens when a storm strikes? It's far more likely that the cedar will fall than a reed will fall. Because the reed goes with the wind, blows in the wind. The wind cannot destroy it because it blows with the wind, goes along with it. The cedar, because of it's so strong. So if it's very strong, fine, it will withstand the wind, but a stronger wind could destroy it. I remember when we were in summer camp, so one of the things, there are not many things you really remember from your school days and camp days, except, educational wise. But I remember we were taking a hike, and we walked over a expansion bridge. And I remember our counselor telling us something I never forgot. He said, so we were on the bridge, so when you walk to the bridge, it shakes, obviously. And you think that the bridge is weak, because it literally shakes. Expansion bridges. Expansion bridges are like the Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan Bridge, Williamsburg Bridge, Verrazano. These are the bridges with the cables that go. They're very elegant and beautiful. But they're very different than, for example, regular bridges are just built on solid pillars, and they don't have that type of sway. So I remember we were afraid. We thought the bridge was weak. And he said, no, because the bridge is an expansion bridge, because it is engineered in a way that it has that type of resilience, it can carry a lot more weight, precisely because it's flexible. Because it's created in a way, that's the feat of engineering, that it sways with the wind and therefore can carry a lot more weight. Whereas another bridge, a bridge that's simply based on sheer brute power, can carry a lot, but it does not have that additional flexibility. When skyscrapers are built, I don't know if you know this, but if you go up to higher floors, they actually sway. Not sway like that, but they are built not to be rigid, but to be somewhat flexible and dexterous, so that when there are strong winds, they will not shatter due to a wind. So you see from this that in engineering, I don't know what the equation is, but there's a certain amount of strength that's added when you allow something to have that so-called flexibility and yielding, so to speak. So you see from that the stronger something is, sometimes that's the stronger, what do they say, the stronger they are, the greater they fall. When someone is very consumed with themselves, very arrogant, very self-important, self-absorbed, what happens when something happens to them? So if it's a good thing, they are ecstatic, but when it's a bad thing, they really take it hard. Someone that has that measure of humility, like the reed, and a great thing happens, it's not the only thing in life, they have ability to absorb it, they appreciate it. But also when a sad thing happens, they don't just shatter. They don't just crack under the wind, because there's that resilience, that ability to know it's not about me. And that's what people like Rabbi Jacobson teach us. Their lives were lived, even in good times, not about me. I'm here to serve. So that doesn't mean he didn't feel pain. It doesn't mean he didn't suffer. Obviously he did and was quite aware of it. But he's able to take that and say, that is my choreography. That's my story. That's my song. Now, of course, the big question is, how does one move from egocentric to becoming less egocentric, or more, we'll call it God-centric or divine-centric? Okay, that requires work where we move away from recognizing, where we recognize and we move away from everything is about me, to recognize this more about than you, that this world needs. That is more about you. I'm sorry, it's not about you, but it's about what the world needs you for. One of the Chassidim of the followers of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneir Zalman, grandfather of the Tzemach Tzedek I mentioned, once came to see the Rebbe Shneir Zalman, and he gave him a whole grocery list of needs. Then he wants this blessing, a blessing for this, a blessing for that, all very beautiful things. After he read his whole list, the Alter Rebbe looked at him and said, "You're telling me what you need, but can you tell me what you are needed for?" See, we all know what we need. We have a list of needs. The question is, have you ever thought about what you're needed for? What are you here to accomplish? Not just what you need to take. What are you here to give and to contribute? That is the key to it all. Now, this doesn't mean that anybody deserves suffering. It doesn't mean that suffering is endured. Suffering is felt less by someone like that, but it means it doesn't destroy you. So though, yes, he died in isolation, in Golus, in exile, which the Chinuch writes is even sometimes worse than death itself, the displacement, and not with his children around him. Yet, he left a legacy. First of all, his writings. Second of all, his son, who affected so many. And of course, the spirit that his son grew up in is this type of home where the focus is not about me, me, me. The focus is about what am I going to contribute to the world. And then when something negative happens, it's a very different type of experience. It's still painful. It's still something we don't prefer. But it becomes part of this higher cause, which is not about you and your rigid self. Now, how do we get that into our thick skulls? That life is not about me, me, me. Some people, when you talk to them about these things, some say to me, it's ridiculous, you're not realistic. Everybody's got an ego. Everything revolves around me. That's what some people say. Other people say that even though it may be true in concept, but the fact of the matter is I'm so used to a routine of life being around me, orbiting around me, very difficult for me to change things. Now, I'm not here to go and argue if somebody wants to be self-consumed, that's their business. But when pain strikes and suffering strikes, what you see is something something interesting. It breaks somebody and it breaks their comfort zone. So you can go in two directions. Either you become more bitter and more angry, which often happens, or it breaks your ego to the point you realize, something, maybe there is more to life than just me. That's the healthy experience of pain and suffering. It's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call that it's not about you, and you see that clearly. Suffering does that. Because when things are going well, you can convince yourself everything is well. What else do I... that's it. But when there's a crack in your life, it opens you up to something that is beyond your conventional experience. Now, the humble person will see that as a great opportunity and a blessing to bring new light into this world. And the arrogant person will just complain and become bitter and curse. Why am I in this predicament? Others deserve it more than me, and so on. When you hear about people, I'm not judging them, but they commit suicide when they lose great fortunes. So they're ready to kill themselves, destroy their families, their wives and their children, because the embarrassment that they identify themselves so much with money, that the embarrassment, that such losses, better for me not to be alive. Think about that. Now, mind you, they don't take the money with them when they commit suicide, because nobody takes money to the other world. That nobody's figured out. So the selfishness of that. Why am I saying I don't judge? Because I don't know their shoes, but they've lived a life, and they've come to such desperation that, as they say, their self-worth is defined by their net worth. I have great compassion and rahmanis and mercy on them. God should bless them. But so in that selfishness, that's so self-consumed that they're defined by their finances. They're defined by their money, not by their love, not by the people that love them. Remember, they weren't born. You're born naked. You're born without a shirt on your back. You come into this world, doesn't matter whether your parents are wealthy or not. Life, by essence, is defined by who you are. And yet they become defined by what they acquired and by what others think about them and their reputation and their class status and their wealth, etc., etc. How sad is that? That's a spirit that's been lost. That's a soul that has gone undercover. I'm giving a strong, extreme example. I know many people don't commit suicide. But the rest don't necessarily mean they don't worship it. It's just that they're not going to go do that. Either they're cowards or they recognize there is more to life. But unfortunately, we live in a world where we can become so identified by the things that are superficial and lose in a sense touch with our own souls. So it's not about the suffering, it's about who you are before you enter into that suffering state or joyous state. Rabbi Jacobson was who he was. So when he entered it, what was the natural reaction? He wrote an essay about it. He wrote a dissertation. He explained it. That was not denial. It was elevating it in a certain way and being humble in the process. They say there are two types of people who never do tshuva, who never will repent. Speakers and writers. Why? Because when they hear something inspiring that can cause you to feel like an awakening and a wake-up call, instead of taking it personally, you say, hey, great material for my next speech. Great material for my next article. And even when they hear this, what I just said, that also becomes the subject of an article. So they never personalize it. Now, on one hand, it's funny. On the other hand, in a case of suffering, it actually could be a certain healthy element to it. That when something negative happens, instead of taking it so personally and letting everything step all over you, and being a judge of your value, saying, look how terrible I must be, how self-loathing, the self-loathing that comes from people who are hurt. Instead, you turn it into an eloquent article about pain and about suffering. I'll share my own experience. My father passed away 11 years ago. So I wrote a few very raw articles. One was called Raw Oval. Oval is a person who's in mourning. And I wrote that I visited many people in my life to console others and comfort them in their time of need, time of loss, death of a family member, a parent. But it was always words. I might try to empathize, but until you don't lose soul in yourself. I lost my father, I felt it from within. It was a very different experience. And I wrote about it. I wrote about the rawness, the vulnerability that comes with it. So I remember someone wrote to me, "Did you really feel vulnerable? Because you're a writer, you're just writing about vulnerability. Because now you're..." That was an interesting point. The fact is, no one should know of it, but when you lose a father, it's not easy to just deflect it into an article. To me, it was actually writing my feelings. But there is something to be said that instead of allowing the pain to completely consume you, in some way you release it through comforting others, or comforting yourself for that matter, as you write about it. It's a certain catharsis that takes place. So in that context, what do we do with pain and suffering? Let's take a new radical way to approach it. Instead of approaching it of something, okay, I'll just ride it through, I'll just lay low, let this be a time of introspection. All that's correct. Let it be the seeds, like I said earlier, yahrzeit and medim, the ones that sow with tears will reap in joy. All that's true. But there's one more dimension to it. And that dimension is that sing a song then. Maybe a sad song, maybe a quiet song, maybe a somber song, maybe a song that only you hear. But it's still a song of your soul. Because the dignity and the majesty and the elegance of your soul does not get diminished just because you're experiencing something negative. It simply means your king, the king or queen within you is now going through a sad moment. Never allow the events of your life to reflect and define who you are. They are what happens to you, not who you are. You may suffer, but you're not a sufferer. You may be in pain, but you're not a pain person. It's something that happens to you. And that distinction is vital. That's part of the humility. Because you are God's servant in this world. You're God's agent to fulfill a particular mission. That's your role. That mission sometimes takes this twist and sometimes that twist. But it's all part of your mission. Your mission is never undignified. There's no such thing. You know when it becomes undignified? When you defile it by saying, I'm nobody, by loathing yourself, by saying, look, if this happens to me, means I'm worthless, means no one cares about me, means that I'm not worth it. Which is unfortunately one of the things that happens when people experience a dysfunctional or traumatic or other type of sad lack of validation and nurturing in their childhood. Ultimately, you start blaming yourself. You think something's the matter with me. I didn't deserve love. That's the way children, innocent children, react. But it's the farthest thing from the truth. It has nothing to do with you. Because the one who's supposed to give you love didn't give you love. That doesn't mean you don't deserve love. It means that person so did not love themselves and therefore did not know how to communicate love. It has nothing to do with you. It's a reflection on the giver, not on the recipient. Who wrote this great article? Last week he wrote an article, Wall Street Journal, I forgot his name. He wrote about the guy, the Egyptian judo. Was it judo? Did not want to give a handshake to the Israeli who beat him in a match in the Olympics. And he talks about how the hatred of the Arab Muslim world toward Jews. But there's a line at the end he says, haters, when someone has hate for others, it's the hater that suffers most. It's sad for the one that's hated, but it's tragic for the one that hates, because they're the ones that are toxic. They're toxified with their hate. It's their life. It's a perfect example of someone consumed with hate. That's not possible for a humble person, because a humble person is never about you, so it's never defined, I'm this way, I'm that way. Things happen to us. Sometimes we win one, sometimes we lose one. Even a loss is seen as a bigger picture, part of a bigger picture. Everything is part of that song. So Rabbi Jacobson, whose 72nd yahrzeit was today, teaches us this lesson. Is he the only one? No, as I mentioned, others as well, but especially that I mentioned the manuscript where he describes his life, his name, even down to the prison that he sat in, what number prison, how many weeks he sat, and the prisons he went from one prison to the next. I find that to be fascinating. Maybe it's not a good word for someone who suffered, but I mean fascinating as a document. It's a tremendous document because he didn't sit down and write, okay, I was in this prison, that prison for autobiographical purposes. He wrote it as part, he elevated. The prisons today are long gone. They're all destroyed. His captors are destroyed. And what we have is a document that shines through history where he took the negative prisons, the negative cities, all these negative experiences and turned it into a story. At the time it was a very painful story. Now when you read it, you see it as almost like elevating his pain. He elevated. He graced his sad experiences, his suffering, and turned it into a song, and turned it into a story of life. When we read at the Seder table, or we recollect every day, we remember Zecher, we remember the exodus from Egypt. So today it's a long way from when our grandparents suffered there. But we documented it, and we recreate it, and we relive it. And b'chol davar, in every generation we are meant to envision as we're leaving Egypt. What's the point? Why should we have to envision suffering from the past? We're not envisioning the suffering, we're envisioning the growth that came through the suffering. People who suffered, there's nothing, the aplomb and the grace of a person under fire, under duress, that comes out stronger. There's nothing more dignified in this world than that. Someone who never suffered, who never went through anything negative, okay, it's nice. But someone who went through it, and what you see is a greater person coming out of the fire, someone more refined, someone who went, as the Jewish people then went, marched to Sinai 50 days after they're leaving from Egypt, and received the greatest mandate of humanitarian mandate, the Torah, of ethics and morality that brought civilization to the world. You would think slave mentality. They should have assumed what their captors were like, become themselves oppressors. No. Instead, they turned it into a life that would be built on rights, human rights, and respect for another. And they would wait thousands of years until those ideas would become popular in the world in which we live today. That is greatness. That's taking suffering and turning it into refinement. So long ago, we don't even feel the suffering anymore. Now we just see the results out of it. That's someone who has that presence of mind and someone who can transcend their life's experiences and does not allow it to define them. You then control your suffering instead of your suffering controlling you. And think about that. One of the most demoralizing things for a human being is to feel that something else controls you. Whether it's a person, whether it's money, whether it's power, whether it's an addiction. That's what it is. Being controlled by something else. We say every day in the prayer after meals, Lo lidei matnas basar v'dam, that we shouldn't need to rely on the gifts of another human being. Or as the verse says it so beautifully, God says to the Jewish people, Avodei atem, you're my servants, you're not servants to my servants. Mordechai would not bow to Haman. We worship one God. We don't worship other humans who are just like us. It's one of the most demoralizing, as I said, humiliating things to be out of control. So now let's look at our life's experiences. When a person has joy, and the joy suddenly controls you instead of you controlling the joy, or the other way around, or negative, or conversely, in a situation where you're sad and the sadness controls you. You start thinking, you start identifying with what has happened with you. It's not just that happened to me, but I've become it. I'm a sufferer. I hate myself. I loathe myself. I'm not worthy. I'm not deserving. What you've done is allowed the experience to control you. So in addition to the so-called abuse or the assault on your individuality that any form of negative experience does, now you've allowed it to control you because you've now identified with it. That's me. On the other hand, the humble person who recognizes I'm a servant of a higher cause, God, then when something happens, it happened to me. It's not me. Who's in control? Not the suffering is not controlling you. You then are controlling how you're going to deal with the suffering. You're going to ride through it. You'll let it help you grow. You turned it into a song. So here he's sitting in prison, exiled, or the other suffering that Rabbi Jacobson that I mentioned endured. And he could have said, you know what? I'm in prison now. What can I do? Instead he said, no, I'm going to turn the prison into the gvuras of Atzilus, into the severities of divine severities, that when they evolve, they look so bitter like this. He essentially took control of what's happening to him by turning it into his song, into his story, into his life story. They tell the story of Rabbi Zusha and his brother Rabbi Elimelech from Lezhensk. They were once, one of them was imprisoned, and his brother came to visit him. And he sees him in prison, and he sees that he's very sad. So his brother says to him, Rabbi Zusha, I think it was that way around, but one of the ways, Rabbi Zusha, we were taught by our teachers, the Hasidic masters, the Maggid of Mezrich, from the Baal Shem Tov, that we always have to be joyous, even when we're in a difficult situation. So Rabbi Elimelech says to Rabbi Zusha says to Rabbi Melech, I'm not sad by the fact that I'm in prison. I understand that. Everything negative has some positive side to it, and I embrace that. I'm sad because it's days now that I'm unable to make a blessing to God for the food that I have. Why? Because in his prison there was the toilet, was the bathroom. And you're not supposed to make a blessing where there's a bathroom. You could eat the food because you have to survive, but you can't make a blessing. So he's not sad about being there, he's sad about he can't make a blessing. So Rabbi Elimelech says to Rabbi Zusha, the same God that said that you're supposed to make a blessing on food also said you don't make a blessing when there's a pail in your room. So you're also fulfilling a mitzvah. This mitzvah is not saying making the blessing. So he says, yeah, you're right. I'm fulfilling God's will. Time to dance. So he begins dancing in simcha that he's fulfilling. It's similar to the words that the previous Chabad Rebbe said to the captives. They said, you know where you are? He says, yeah, I'm in a place that is absolved of having a mezuzah on the door, like a stable. And through that he brought also a thought of Torah into that stable. So Zusha starts dancing. As he starts dancing, the other inmates start dancing, and it's a party. The anti-Semitic guards, who are very furious, come running in. They say, what's this dancing here? So the non-Jewish dancers and others start pointing, it's Zusha. So they say, why is he dancing? They say, we don't really know, but it's something to do with the pail in his room. So the guard, who was really hated Jews, said, really? I'll show him. And he went into the prison and took the pail out and just took the pail out of the room. So Rabbi Zusha was able to make a blessing. Little did the guard know. They tell the story with the Kotzker Rebbe, who was once standing at the side of a river, the river bank. And he sees someone flailing his arms, saying, save me, save me. You're drowning. The Kotzker Rebbe said, I can't swim. And the guy's yelling, and he keeps going, bobbing his head in and out of the waves. Save me, I'm about to go down. The Kotzker says, I can't save you. I can't swim. Okay, finally, one final time, he raises his hands, he's about to completely sink, and he says to the Kotzker Rebbe, please save me. So the Kotzker Rebbe says, I can't, but I'll tell you what I can do for you. When you get down below, when you sink below, and you meet the Leviosan is Leviathan, it's like the big whale that will be served in Messianic times. It's considered that the whale, says, when you see the whale, send him my best regards. And I'm waiting for the day that we can have him for a meal. The swimmer began to laugh with such laughter because such a ridiculous joke. Instead of telling him save his life from the water, he's telling him that you get down below, send regards to the whale. They started laughing so much, suddenly he had a new burst of energy and strength, and he was able to swim to the shore. So tell me, dancing helps or doesn't help? Singing helps or doesn't help? Here these two stories indicate they could have been completely consumed and frozen and overwhelmed by the challenge, and yet they saw some silver lining, some positive side, and they dance and sing, and suddenly the joy of the song actually transformed the moment. That's the power. See, because the negative, demoralizing effect of feeling like you're a sufferer, feeling like that you are a victim, that weakens your spirit. And that in turn just makes the suffering even worse. Whereas a person who doesn't let the suffering shape and define them, and is able to translate it into something positive, like in the story of Rabbi Yitzchak or the others that wrote their commentaries and their composition, their books, or you're singing and dancing, that gives you strength. And when it gives you strength, you're able to not just transcend, you're able to elevate the moment. So it's really an opportunity to not allow yourself to become overwhelmed and consumed by the experience that you're enduring. This is the secret. Now, obviously, it's always easier said than done. That's why my position here is always the easier one. I'm sitting and talking about it. However, but it could be done. Here was a man who did it, and there are other men who did it, and other women who did it. And what it takes is you have to be ready to be serious about your life and realize it's not about me, 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 me. The more me, the more there are things in life that can step on you, like the Tzemach Tzedek said. You spread yourself out everywhere, you see yourself everywhere, so of course it's inevitable that you're going to be stepped on because you're all over the place. When you have Miman Offerli Yankiv, there's an expression we read in the book of Numbers, in the what was meant to be a curse and ended up being a blessing from Bilam. It says, Miman Offerli, who can count the dust of Jacob? And it's considered a blessing. So everyone asks the question, dust is not a blessing. Everybody walks on dust. So no, dust is v'nafshi ka'ofel kol tiyah. As we say in the end of every Shemoneh Esrei, we say, my spirit is like humble, like dust before all. The power of dust is because, that's why he says, Miman, how could you count dust? You can't count dust. You know why you can't count it? Because it doesn't exist. It doesn't have value. You can count things that are large, that have an ego, have a presence. Dust, by its very nature, is everyone steps on. We're not talking about here a doormat, a scoop in the dresses. We're talking about a state of being where you're not consumed with yourself. And that's what Balaam was saying. You can't count them. So you can't destroy them. You can only destroy things you can count. Things you can't count, there's no, what's your target? You can't destroy bittul. That's the bottom line. Bittul kenish botl. Something that's selfless cannot be made selfless, because the more selfless it is, the more powerful it becomes. On the other hand, something that's strong, like I said, strong like a cedar. You're going to stand strong like a cedar? Okay. You could be as strong as you like, but there's going to be something stronger than you because you're an identity. You're a personality. So it's the humility that allows us, really, to travel under the radar and experience the greatest things, because it's not defined by a measured and by parameters that are tangible. That's ultimately the secret. So interestingly, suffering breaks the ego. Suffering breaks the person in order to reveal that there's something about you that's unbreakable. As long as you're standing strong, you can convince yourself, I'm unbreakable because I'm a strong person. Then something happens, you realize you're not so strong. The person who knows how to absorb a suffering and pain is the person who doesn't have that much ego. And therefore the suffering does not define them and becomes a stepping stone, as I said, a catalyst for growth. That's the story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. And this is also the story of the 7 weeks of comfort that follow the 3 weeks of affliction. 7 weeks of comfort. Because what it does is it introduces into our lives a dimension that we've gone through the difficulty and the pain and the suffering, but we're now in a state where we can be comforted. And the comfort actually comes to realize that whatever happened, the negative actually ends up being part of the positive. As Rabbi Akiva so aptly was able to see when he looked at the Temple Mount and the Sho'olim, the fox that were running through the place where once the Holy of Holies, and his colleagues were crying, and he laughed. He smiled. What did he smile about? He's seeing destruction. But he saw within the destruction, he saw the fulfillment of the next step, that this destruction would bring to something far greater. He had those eyes because he himself went through a difficult life. Till age 40, he was not a person who knew any Torah. He himself was either a convert or a child of converts. And what does his name say? Akiva, like Yaakov. Akev. Akev is the sole of the foot. It's the lowest part of the foot that touches the dust of the earth. The Alviz Rab Nosson says that the akev, the heel of the foot, is the malach hamov sheba'adam. It's like the angel of death within us. The human being is like a microcosm of all the cosmos. So what's the angel of death? It's like the heel. Why? Because the heel is the most numb, it's the most tough, doesn't feel. That's why it's able to walk, it's able to absorb. But precisely because it's the lowest level. So Rabbi Akiva, who went through the lowest, was able to appreciate that there's nothing that really can break you, because once you're already humble, a humble person can't be broken. It's people who are arrogant, like the kosher ka'aras, that they're tough and strong like a cedar. That's someone that can be broken. So that's in essence ultimately the great secret of Gvura itself, what we were talking about earlier, the Gvura, Levi, Yitzchak, and all the other elements of severity. Chesed is about giving. Giving. It's a beautiful and powerful and necessary faculty and attribute. But Gvura is about holding back, withholding, restraint. And restraint in its own way has greater power than giving. Has greater power because it takes more energy to restrain yourself when you want to give than to give. It takes more energy of a wise person to be quiet than to speak, because he has what to say. So that type of withholding, restraining yourself, has in a sense a certain discipline, a certain power that's even greater than the power of giving. But it's an inverted power. It's like a concealed power. It's not a power that you see. It's a power of withholding. So you don't really see it, but in it lies great, great power and strength, which is the power of every vacuum, and every vacuum has that power that you can't really see it, but you see it because it sucks its power. It's like the black hole that's so powerful it doesn't let light escape, but that exactly is its power. So in life we have the positive times, which are like chesed, kindness, blessings that flow, and there are times where the blessings are concealed. And the concealment should never be seen as an end in itself. Concealment itself is expression of something deeper. Now, why it's hard to implement is because our egos are consumed with themselves, and because we're accustomed to thinking a certain way, and we have that sense of entitlement. I want it my way, and we don't get it my way, we get disturbed. So the real challenge is that you're not always going to get it your way, and that happens to be a good thing, because it shows you it's not about you. There's a bigger story going on. People talk. I was a few weeks ago. I gave a talk somewhere, and I was talking. It was a topic about marriage, about love, and so on. And a few singles, who I guess are now at the stage of worshiping their single lives, got up and asked me. They said, what's so good about marriage? You have to compromise. There's another person you have to reckon with, and children. Here on your own, you're a single person. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to answer to anybody. I smiled to myself when I heard the question. Only a single would ever say that. Now, I'm not saying marriage doesn't have its challenges, but I tried to explain to them. I said, it's exactly why marriage is so powerful, because of what you just said. You think the me and the self is everything. That's what you think is the beginning and end of life, because you could do whatever you want and you don't have to answer to anyone. You want to know the real truth is, the greatest thing for a human being is not to be consumed with themselves. And that's actually the best thing for the self. And marriage, obviously we're talking about work on a marriage, a healthy marriage, a loving marriage, and so on. Marriage is exactly that statement, that it's not all about you. And one of them said, I thought marriage is about me. And I'm going to get now something, I'm going to become even more. Marriage is yet another way of becoming a greater person. I said, yes, it's becoming a greater person, but because it's not about you. There's two ways to become greater. You just, like I said before, you just become more arrogant and more me. And the other person is an adjunct to you. Until now, you were a single person and only you worshipped yourself. Now you want your wife or your husband and your children to worship you. So now you have a kingdom. So you're now a king over a whole bunch of people. That's nice. Some people have that type of attitude. They think that's what it's about. You can imagine, insecure people think like that. The secure person will say, marriage? No, I have enough living with myself. I know about me. I want to have something beyond me. Who says something like that? Only someone that's very secure. You'll never hear an insecure person say, I want something beyond me. Because insecurity by definition means I have to hold on to my assets, I have to hold on, I have to hoard, I have to keep on protecting my turf because I'm afraid it'll be taken away from me. Secure person says, I'm fine. I'm looking for something, I'm looking not an extension of myself. I want something truly new. That's also the difference between people who say, I want control in relationships. What does control in relationships mean? That's about you, and the other person is under your control. But that undermines the whole purpose of relationship. The whole point of relationship is that it's not in your control, that it's beyond you. And that makes you a far greater person because now you can reach horizons that are not yours. Imagine someone saying, I want to see the broadest horizon, but on my terms. As soon as you say your terms, it's not going to be the broadest horizon, it's going to be the horizon on your terms. The whole point of our real horizon, broadened horizon, means it's horizon on the horizon's terms, not in your terms. The whole purpose of God, frankly, is that. Idol worship is essentially a God created in your own image. You know something? I'm now in the mood of this type of God, that type of God. The real meaning of God is that it's not about you. There's something greater than you are, and when you embrace it, when you become immersed in it, like I said earlier, you become immersed in the waters of something greater than you are, then you become an experience that's greater than yourself. Now, some people cannot hear what I just said. I can tell you right now. Narcissists, people who are either very, very insecure and are fighting for their turf all the time, as I mentioned, can find what I just said very difficult to understand. I know this because I know people, they tell me, I respect you, but I can't understand what you just said. And the reason they can't understand it is because they're blinded. You know, it's like, imagine somebody's looking in a mirror all their entire life. They have mirrors, and they look into mirrors all the time. What do you see in a mirror? Yourself. Suddenly you show them a pane of glass that doesn't have silver smeared on the back. And what do they see? Other people. It's quite shocking. Now, I'm not suggesting that a narcissist doesn't see other people, but they see them as a reflection of themselves and an extension of themselves, and don't even know it. So the ability to really, because this is part of the catch-22, if you're so consumed with yourself, and the suffering that you suffer is also part of your being consumed with yourself, obviously that alone blinds you from seeing something beyond yourself. But we always hope that the soul somewhere, even of a narcissist or even of a person completely consumed with themselves, has some opening. Something that will hear the idea that there's something more than you. And that's the cause for which you were created, the purpose for which you were created. And God forbid if that doesn't work, yes, often suffering becomes the only last resort. Because the only thing that breaks and cracks your ultimate comfort zone. And it's the comfort zone of thinking that I have it figured out or I am all right, it's me, that doesn't really allow us to experience something greater. But what I said now is not a curse nor a threat, God forbid, just an observation. That's how it works. But we don't have to wait for that. There are plenty of ample opportunities for us to be able to transcend ourselves. As I said, the lessons learned from what I'm discussing this class is that, yes, singing can transform suffering. You know why? Because it takes suffering away from it being, I'm suffering and look how bad I feel about myself, and wallowing in our own self-pity, and turns it into a song. It could be a sad song, and it could be a melancholic song, but it's still a song. It's a song of your destiny. It's a song of your deeper choreography, and it's part of the song of your life. And that's what great people have done, and not just great people as well, we learn from them, that they can take the negative experiences and turn it into a story of their lives. It's sad, and it's not pleasant, but they elevated it to becoming some form of divine choreography. So just like you take a trip, a journey, and the journey will take you through bright places, but it'll also take you through dark caves. But you're still traveling on that same road. It's one road, it's one journey. That's what a symphony is about. That every part of the song, every part of the melody, whether it's the ecstatic moments or the melancholic ones, the downs or the ups, this twist or that twist, this twist and turn and that twist and turn. Even the moments where it seems like the analogy of the Baal Shem Tov, the spiral staircase. Not like a straight staircase, you see the destination, but you're turning. And as you get closer to the destination, you have to make another revolution. With your back facing the destination, to the point that you're in complete darkness, you have no clue, but you're right by the door. that's when you need humility. Because if it's up to you, you'll say, hey, I don't see the light. I don't see the door. But maybe you shouldn't worship the eye. You don't see the door, doesn't mean there's no door there. It's like they tell the story of a few of the enlightened maskilim, the enlightened ones. They were intellectuals from Germany who came to visit the Rebbe Rashab, who's known as a great intellectual himself. And they came and they presented their skepticism. And one of them said, we see that you read about and you pray and you mention angels. How do we know they're angels? What's your proof that they're angels? So the Rebbe Rashab gave them this analogy. He says, how did you get here from wherever city you came? They said, we hired a wagon driver, horses, a bunch of horses that led us here. So the Rebbe Rashab said, so while you were sitting in the carriage, what were you doing? We were discussing philosophical ideas and concepts. And what was the wagon driver doing? He was riding the horses, whipping them, making sure. He said, but what was he thinking? He was thinking about the pay that he's going to get when they get to the destination. They're going to pay him. That's why he's doing this. What about the horses? What were the horses thinking? The horses were thinking that the faster they run, the faster they're going to get the hay and the oats that they will have when they get to their destination. So he says, okay, so we have three different thoughts here. The horses are thinking about the oats and the hay. The wagon driver is thinking about his pay and that he's going to get remunerated for his driving you. And you guys are thinking about the philosophies and ideas. So tell me, because the horses are thinking about hay and the wagon driver is thinking about his money, is your philosophy not philosophy? And they realized that they had met their match, or maybe more than their match. Because what he was saying was, because you see what you see with your eyes, like a horse that sees the hay, that's why the angels are not angels. He didn't even go ahead to prove anything. He says, it's about you. You have your perception, your stereotypes, your limited perception. It would be like someone saying, I can't see microscopic particles. I can't see quantum particles, subatomic particles. You can't see them. I could tell you with microscopes, can't see them either. Because an atom is not seeable. So who was it? Author, it was Sir, what was his name? Come to me, Eddington. Sir Arthur Eddington was a physicist and a scientist in the mid-20th century, early 20th century. And when the first discoveries of quantum mechanics were coming out, they were very bizarre. They called it bizarre physics. Spooky, the spooky side of physics, because of the indeterminism and the probability and all the different weird conclusions that were becoming clearly confirmed again and again, that were counterintuitive. We always knew there's a deterministic universe. Here's a state of probability. You've heard of Schrodinger's cat, the experiment with Schrodinger's cat, that it's alive and not alive at the same time. You can look it up. It's not so relevant to details. But it was definitely weird logic, or defied logic, actually. So someone asked Sir Arthur Eddington and said, how could you come to such conclusions, weird conclusions, about something we've never seen? No one has seen an atom, let alone subatomic particles. So he gave the classic example of a fisherman who spread his net all over the seas and then came up with all types of fish, different shapes and different colors and different sizes, and started documenting it. And then he came to a great conclusion. What was the conclusion? There are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. You hear that? No fish in the sea shorter than a half-inch long. And he was about to make a big announcement that he came up to a tremendous discovery. Till his little daughter, like the emperor with no clothes, said to him, 1 second. Let's look at the net you used. And the net had spaces that were half-inch wide and long. So what happened to the fish that were smaller than a half-inch? They fell back into the sea. So basically, he has to make the announcement that if you use a net with half-inch spaces, there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. But obviously, that's a ridiculous statement. The problem was his instrument, not the reality. So we're going to use our instruments, which have limited scope and perspective to determine what is real, what's not real. Yes, eyes see certain things. Microscopes see more. And then there are things that see even further with other tools and instruments. It's all about the instruments you use. So suffering is definitely one of the most powerful and debilitating and demoralizing experiences. It could definitely be that. But that's as long as you look with these eyes. If you broaden your eyes, your vision, and you come to see a bigger perspective, and you don't allow it to be about me, you suddenly can say maybe this is another, a deeper experience, maybe it's time to sing. Try it out. As difficult as it may be, sing. Don't allow yourself to get bitter and negative. Get up, or silently or quietly sing a song. The song of silence, the song of pain, the song of suffering, but it's a song, and it's part of your symphony and part of your journey. And then what will happen is it will actually free you from being a victim to it, instead becoming in control of it. And slowly will turn it into a negative, into a positive. Try it out and let me know what you discover. So, with that, may everybody just have only joyous experiences, but when you see a moment of darkness, see it as like a shadow that can reveal deeper light. Everyone should have the 7 weeks of comfort, only comfort, and we continue our journey week after week through all its twists and turns of this magnificent journey which is called life. Each of you in your own hopefully dignified way travel on, and I hope I'm honored to be part of that journey of yours, and you are part of mine. Meaningful Life Center is there in any way to help us all celebrate these journeys through thick and thin, through dark and light. Thank you very much.